Welcome, everyone. Your life, your family, your business has been severely disrupted. And what began as a global health crisis is now a global business crisis. So when we first designed this and talked about having this webinar with Eugene and the wonderful Align family and business, we had no idea we would, most of us, be shutting down and shut down, have to be at home today or wherever you might be. So my focus has shifted. I want to really address some of the issues that we're all experiencing, but still tie back to the concept of that there are strategic conversations that I'm predicting that you and your leadership team are missing. And I would like to equip you with some ideas and some follow-up tools that can be accessible to you that you can apply as you look at the business that you have and the momentum that has now almost ground to a halt or slowed down significantly or is in threat of slowing down. So we're going to, I hope, go away with some tools that will help you. Now, I have 20 years experience as a mental health provider here in Indianapolis, Indiana. I worked with the Indiana State Police in crisis management, was trained by the FBI in hostage and suicide negotiations. Also then for about 20 years, I've been an advisor for CEOs and executive coach for leadership teams. And so I'm honored that you're here. And please, I want you to think of what are the questions I want to ask that I'm hoping I can address. If at some point after this you would like to communicate with me, I have some information that's available. My website, as you can see, is culturesthatwork.com. My phone number that you can access me through, please call me. I'd be glad to give you some time to address questions since we're under a crisis mode. So thank you again. We'll be going in and out of some PowerPoint, but also then some just hopefully direct conversations we can have with each other. So let's go to the PowerPoint presentation. So the missing strategic conversations, accelerating your business growth flywheel through productive conflict. You know, in the Scaling Up book, was actually part of the team that gave some advice to Verne, but didn't realize that Verne said, you know, one of the big barriers for teams is friendship. You know, your friends, and sometimes it's really hard to have these tougher, uncomfortable conversations. And as you grow, it's organizational politics that often becomes a hidden problem that we need to address. So the book that I designed was based around that concept that more than likely you're not having the productive conflict conversations that you need to be having because we're socially conditioned to be friendly. So it doesn't mean we stop being friends, but it does mean we learn how to have productive conflict. So that's the essence of the book, and we'll get to how it relates to you, especially during this global business crisis. And I've got some fresh material I'd like to share with you as well. The quote that I typically use and is the foundation for my book is Peter Drucker said, "Only three things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership." So as a Scaling Up executive coach, along with coaches around the world, we know how important it is that leadership is the key for your scaling up efforts. The number one habit is that the senior team is healthy and aligned, that you understand each other's styles, you're self-aware, and that you're willing to participate in productive conflict or debate. As a matter of fact, Patrick Lencioni, one of the thought leaders that we embrace, the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team, says that you must be able to master conflict. It's interesting, in his new book, The Motive, he doubles down on conflict. And when you look at the work of Daniel Goleman and others with emotional intelligence, mastering the ability to have productive, constructive conflict is one of your biggest challenges, I predict. If it isn't, great. I want to hear from you and how you've been able to master that as well. Now, I have another advisor that has become very important to me. His name is Mark Devine. Mark is a former commander in SEAL, Navy SEAL, is retired. And he talks about the fact that when you're in war, and in many ways we are under siege, we're facing war, you'll experience VUCA, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. As a matter of fact, today I would like to suggest that you learn how to linger with ambiguity, because out of that you'll discover resolutions and solutions you would have never considered if you had only just been so focused on solving problems in a tactical way. So that's why these conversations are strategic conversations that will impact your one-page plan that hopefully you're using the Align tool to keep track of. Mark said this, it's, that you've got to stare down the fear wolf to get to the courage roll. I have a magazine coming out that you'll get a copy of if you wish. And we have an article by Mark and myself. And the idea from the Native American philosophy is that you feed the wolf of fear or courage, whichever one you feed is what you'll have. So it's a fantastic metaphor. I have a reference for his website. The book, you see my little picture here, I'll show it to you later, is Staring Down the Wolf. It's a bestseller. I'm actually one of his students. And so I encourage you to go to his website. It's listed. We'll show that to you later. Staring Down the Wolf. He has some fantastic webinars and some support and help that could really impact you and those that you serve. So Staring Down the Wolf concept is this, that each of us has to become mentally tough. The mental toughness is something that you can actually learn. Now, when you think of a Navy SEAL, the first time I met Mark was just before in a summit setting in the evening before we had the summit the next day. He was the kindest, gentlest man I've ever met, but man, his eyes were focused. So this guy does yoga, meditation, mindfulness. He's deeply spiritual. So it's not the tough guy at a bar. Mental toughness is what we have to have now. You can't scale up in this environment if you're not mentally tough. But mental toughness means that you realize that everything is important that we do is done with a team. You're not alone. And that mentally, you all have to be able to have a shared vision. And that when you have something from the outside come at you, you have to have the ability to control your responses to the outside world, right? And that's what's happening now. So it's vertical development, deep work within each of us to really have the capacity to have a quiet mind when all hell is breaking loose, or all the viruses are all around us, to remain calm but steadfast and steady. And that's the vertical development. Horizontal is your skills as a leader, which we all need to keep developing. But my specialty is this more vertical development. How is it that we show up, practice having a quiet mind, and be able then to have the kind of mindset that we can really understand how is it that we make the best decisions when we're in a war-like setting? And I don't think that's just a metaphor, right? All the countries that are represented, it's a battle zone, and it's against a virus. Well, I would like to include also an amazing thought leader who I have had a chance to meet twice, Jim Collins, and he wrote the book Good to Great, and he has an amazing booklet that you should get. I think he calls it a monograph called Turning the Flywheel. So if you're working with a coach, your coach is equipped to help you to understand that the concept of a business flywheel, which I'll show you in just a moment from an example from my book, really feeds your strategic planning and your strategic thinking, execution planning that you're documenting on your Align Today platform. So the idea is, why is it that some companies build momentum and others don't? As a matter of fact, I've had quite a contrast this morning. I was at an event where everybody stayed 6 feet away. There were 5 people there. It was a launch of a new product by an inventor that I'm working with as the coach. And they're excited today. They haven't slowed down. They've honored being safe and keeping the distance and wearing masks as necessary, I think, in their setting. And they're excited. They have this flywheel, this concept, you're an entrepreneur, you get things started. And I just saw today that the inventor wasn't pushing that flywheel by himself. He had a team. And then I go back to a phone call that I had with some amazing clients. So Tag Birds there at the end of the table, the Sandy Hare, and Andrew Held, 10 years ago, started their own entrepreneurial firm. They're attorneys who had been in commercial real estate law. They started their own company, Birds and Held. And after they, first strategic plan was on a proverbial napkin, right? But after a while, it became a part of a Line Today platform. But nevertheless, when they first started their first apartment building, they looked at each other like, whoa, we can't do this on our own. So they needed property management, they needed supervision, they needed someone to do the maintenance, they needed a marketing person. So the concept is seen easily then when you read this pamphlet, this monogram, it really helps you to think better strategically. And even though these guys are pretty sophisticated, they have $1 billion of assets of apartments, you can imagine the threat Monday for Tag and Andrew, $1 billion of apartment buildings that they have mortgages on themselves, with maybe 30% of the people not being able to pay the rent potentially. So that's what they had to grapple with. What were the assumptions that they had to deal with? And what they did, though, is we went back to the business flywheel. So the concept, as you can see, the flywheel starts with their understanding and to create a high standard of living for residents. Then what they do is they really need to identify value-creating opportunities for new properties. So that's what they've done. And so they're growing each quarter. As their coach, I'm working with the senior team. They're making decisions. Where do we play? What's our sandbox? Then they secure long-term financing through investors. You can imagine the investors are wondering, hey, how's my investment? So as they're going through this crisis, they're really thinking about, all right, we have these new properties. Now they're not quite leased up yet. We have investors that we need to be communicating with. And then they have these well-capitalized improvement plans. So construction now is halted a bit. They're in pause mode because they're not sure what's going to be happening in the next few weeks. But they need to continue to reinvest in these properties. So how do they continue to do that in the midst of a crisis? And then provide the best practices of very responsive property management teams. That then creates this standard of living for residents. So this flywheel helps them in a crisis to really have what I call critical thinking skills, to think through each component of our flywheel and where is there a decrease of momentum and how can we increase the momentum. So again, the other company I was working with, their flywheel has been moving. Now they're rolling out the very first of millions of these. It's a flood prevention system for new homes. And so everyone, though, has to really understand the concept of momentum and that the quality of our conversations has a significant impact on either accelerating the momentum or decelerating the momentum of your business flywheel. And often there are missing conversations, missing strategic conversations that are well informed, especially if you know and understand your business flywheel, which can evolve and get perfected over time. As a matter of fact, they have another version of this that got even more perfected after I published the book. Nevertheless, think of this. All of your strategic decisions now are going to be altered by the outside circumstances. And remember what Mark says, you have to be mentally tough and not allow the mind to be gripped by fear, but rather have a mindset where you're able to be in battle with bullets flying around you, literally, for Mark and his Navy SEAL teams, but you're remaining calm and steadfast toward the mission and unwavering, even if you have to be resilient and adapt to the outside circumstances. So that's the concept that I'd like to share with you today. Now, I'd like to have you use your chat feature here. I'd like for you to consider this question. When it comes to workplace conflict, what is one word that comes to mind for you? Okay, so let's see if we have some folks, Eugene and Henry, if you could see if there's some folks. Well, what's the one word? I'd like for all of you just to go on and put a word in to describe one word that describes workplace conflict. Now in the book, I do have a quote that says this one, I think one person said to me, why in the world are we talking about conflict at work? We shouldn't have conflict at work. And the other guy next to him laughs. He says, oh my gosh, he says, there's always, like he said, friction, confusion, underperformance. It's happening most of the time.
So Craig,
yes.
Craig, a few responses, although not one word, but bullying by the CEO, productive, politics, escalation or clash of personalities. Those are some of the responses we received so far.
Yes, right. So often the word conflict is negative, right? I mean, it's typically how we think of the word conflict. What I'd like to do is reframe, and there is an assessment called productive conflict. Some of the coaches are pretty familiar with it. And in that assessment, productive conflict report, the definition of conflict, it comes down to the difference of opinions involving strong emotions. I have a story in the Accelerate Through Conflict of Jeff Kittle, an amazing CEO. I've worked with him for 10 years and his team. They've gone from 100 employees to now over 600. They have properties around the country. They are in affordable housing. Jeff and his team are exceptionally good at honoring the diversity of opinions and not they become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And because they know that conflict, out of conflict, we gain so much more. And one of the respondents there, Eugene, it was positive, and that's good. Many of you know how important this is. My guess is that your culture may not, that unconsciously there is a bias toward having a sense of, again, we're conditioned to avoid conflict typically. So here's the idea. While we can't control how others respond to conflict, we can control our own response. And I invite you to do the deeper work. Unless you do the deep work, you're going to unconsciously have some place in some context that you'll be pretty good at having the right kind of conflict. Then you go home and it's like the opposite, right? Or there are certain contexts politically when the politics of the environment. But like with Jeff Kittle, Herman Kittle Properties, CEO, he makes it such that he wants you to think collegially with him. So when we're congenial, we're friendly. When we're collegial, we hold one another accountable. So being too congenial can be a problem because you're not addressing some issues. Collegial means, hey, we're humans in the same situation. Let go of the fact, as Jeff would say, that I'm the CEO. Let's have a conversation. And he does this often with one of the maintenance supervisor who's working with the guys and gals to get their hands pretty dirty. Jeff's, willing to do that, but he needs to know from them, what's the truth? What are the brutal facts? But what we can control is our response. So I have a very interesting quote in my book that I'd like to share with you. I'm going to read it now. So this is a quote of a quote. Ari Weinswick, who's the co-founder of Zingerman's in Ann Arbor, quoted Viktor Frankl. And so I'll share with you his quote and what he says about it. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl writes, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So then Ari says this, to me, mindfulness is about actively moving into and spending as much time as possible, living, breathing, feeling, thinking, and sensing in that space. Again, the space between stimulus and response. Choosing mindfulness is a conscious move towards self-growth and freedom, better leadership, and a better life. So if you have not been trained in mindfulness, this is the time. This is the time to learn. It's not an Eastern philosophy. It's a part of all healthy, I think, spiritual traditions and religions and philosophies, but nevertheless, your mindset as you're facing these issues has to be addressed. So let's think now of a conflict situation you wish you would have handled better, and then what type of conflict resulted. So think of it as like a scale. So on one scale, if you tip it, it's false harmony, it's unproductive, conflict is hidden, it's comfortable, we avoid issues, but it's artificial. Then if you tip it way over to the other side, it's destructive conflict. And that, when it tips over, the conflict, if it's trigger automatic biased thoughts, you're having stuff in your head that you're not saying. And these then in turn trigger destructive responses. So in between is this balance. It takes a little bit of effort. It's a little bit comfortable. You have to become more comfortable with uncomfortable. And that requires self-leadership from colleagues to honor each other's styles and to make sure it's safe during what I call in-the-moment conversations. Now, there's a best-selling book out there, Crucial Conversations. You should read it. You should implement it. My thesis is this: we should have the conversations before they become crucial conversations. So my book gives you some guidelines, and we're going to go through that today. You'll get the slide deck, and we'll send that to you so you can see this later. You can watch the video. But the concept is this, that learn to have these in-the-moment conversations, a productive conflict conversation, where if I could help you to find a way to be more comfortable being uncomfortable, because every conversation impacts the experience of that business flywheel. It impacts some component of the internal working with your colleagues. It impacts delivering your products and services. It impacts vendors. It impacts your customers, those that pay you money. So every conversation doesn't have to have conflict, but when necessary, when there is an issue that needs to be addressed, hopefully when you get a Kindle version of the book, or if you buy the book, as a matter of fact, if you buy the book and do this productive conflict assessment, I'll give you a free coaching session. I'll be glad to help you to unpack it and see where you show up and understand your team better. So I think now what I'll do is just for the next few minutes, unpack some of the ideas here. But first, let's see did anyone give you anything in their chat box about a conflict situation they wish they would have handled better? Eugene?
They did not.
Okay, that's fine. That was more, I just want to check in. So think about that. I would like for you to think of, all right, what's a conflict situation you wish you would have handled better? Now we're going to go through some of the main concepts in my book. We'll go for 10, 15 minutes. Then we'll have plenty of time for some conversation about questions you're having. All right, so just think of the conflict situation, how it ended up, and what you wish you could have done differently. So there are three types that we've mentioned: unproductive, destructive, and productive. Kind of joking even about my own book. All right, in theory, you should say something like, I'm too angry now, I'll be back in 3 hours. But we do need to have a mechanism to help us to understand when are we having unresolved issues that need to be resolved. We need to have a mechanism to understand it. When the relationships only lead to false harmony, that becomes unproductive. And then avoidance of conflict definitely will negatively impact the momentum of your business, even if you have a significant level of trust. Destructive conflict is obvious. That will lead to disengagement and underperformance. And what happens often is we're in a situation, there's a difference of opinion, and we'll have automatic thoughts. And those automatic thoughts are often biased towards something about yourself or other people, and it's that junk in our head, so you need to be able to assess what are those automatic thoughts. And mindful leaders have the capacity and insight to observe, oh, hey, I'm thinking I shouldn't bring this up with Charlie right now, or this situation is really tough, especially let's take now, you have many situations you're facing in your business today that, can you just take it as news? Is it bad news or good news? Right now, it seems like all bad news. But many of the companies and the CEOs I'm working with, they're trying to find ways to bring out of it, hey, this is just news. Whether it's good or bad, we're going to do our best to not get gripped by automatic thoughts that can really lead toward destructive conflict, like gossip, or withdrawing, arguing with other people. So automatic thoughts usually avoid critical thinking and lead to interpretations of news as bad or good. The concept of a Navy SEAL is, whatever's happening, I'm going to maintain equanimity, a balanced state of mind. So productive conflict is an absolutely critical piece for you to demonstrate that you care for your team. Again, another presenter at the summit for Scaling Up, Alden Mills, I captured that quote. Now look at this, this picture. Those are called boat teams. And each team has each person in there has a buddy. And whatever happens to your buddy, you're accountable and responsible for that buddy. As a matter of fact, talk about in the moment conversations. They're having these continuous conversations because the wave is coming at them. And the choices they make, if they're individualistic rather than what is it about the team, could be disastrous. Even in the training, you could break ribs or legs. So the concept is this, that you need to master conflict. You need to be able to improve your ability to have these in the moment conversations and not avoid them. So we'll go through the 4 steps, and we're just going to give you an overview. Obviously, this is a chance just to get your head around this. Step 1, seize the moment and regain focus. The easy way to think about this, wherever you are in the world, teams have to have a huddle. And typically a huddle comes when there's a challenge. There's so much time left in the game, they're behind or they're ahead. Something needs to be addressed, so you huddle. You seize the moment. We got to talk. We have to come together and regain our focus. And so typically when you come in for a huddle, you drink some Gatorade or water or whatever you might do. You sit down for a moment and you quiet your mind. You have to have a more quiet mind, because otherwise, right now, my question to you is, what are you seized by? What is seizing you that is fear? Are you feeding the fear? If you seize the moment and you address, I have fear, but I'm going to stare it down. And I'm going to quiet my mind and begin to think better about the situation. So when I teach colleagues to do this, the first question that they each say to each other, they will both answer this question, hey, what's on your mind that needs to be addressed or put aside to be fully present and focused? Very important question. So when I was working with Tag and Andrew and their coaching session together, we took a moment to just breathe. Actually, as a matter of fact, box breathing that I learned from Mark Divine is a breath in for 5 seconds, a pause for a count of 5, and then letting go for a count of 5, pause. So it's just kind of like you breathe in, pause, breathe out, pause. And simple idea. I know you may be sick of, hey, let's learn how to breathe. But it's a pretty powerful concept, being able to stay present and focused. And then in this first step, we want to really understand, well, what is the conflict and what is the real challenge for you? And each of you needs to be able to express it. Hey, for me, the challenge of the COVID virus is maybe it's at home, or a loved one, an elderly parent. What are the conflicts that you're feeling, or what's the real challenge for you? Is something that I learned from the book of Michael Bengay-Stanier in his book, The Coaching Habit, which you should read. And he says, that question is pretty powerful. What's the real challenge for you? So remember to use that and follow up on Michael's book as well. During this part, though, during this first step, something called critical thinking should be included into this. Now, critical thinking is the ability to challenge the assumptions that you have, or that are coming at you, or that others have, rooting out the biases that are coming at you that you have, that others have, then being able to ask questions that draw out new alternatives, but then press for evidence to support new solutions. Now, because this requires some more training, we will offer to you this afternoon a free webinar that I'll be doing probably next week that will kind of be a roll up your sleeves and let's just really learn how to practice critical thinking when we answer that question is, what is the real challenge? What is the real challenge for us? Because you may be having false assumptions. As a matter of fact, one of the coaches in our community, Bruce Eckfeld, calls it working assumptions. So for example, you probably need to assume the worst. And then if it's 80% that, 50%, 20%, what will be your response? So look at get a list and put assumptions, and then let's then you start to sort out what's a worry and what's a concern. What's a worry? What's a concern? A worry you can't do much about. A concern you can do something about. And then get the assumptions built out. Hey, best case scenario, worst case scenario. Now, you probably have a bias for your business. But think of all the biases that you're dealing with. Individual biases each of your employees has for their family, for their health. The biases that your customers have. So it just provides a different context or different conversation when you root out what are the assumptions and biases and ask open-ended questions. So you can explore what are the alternatives when we look at the assumptions we're having to deal with. And then finally, press for the evidence to support the new solutions. And in essence, the first letter of each of these words, CRAP, well, you can pronounce it yourself. So the ability to practice critical thinking, excuse me, if you would like to go more deeply into that, we'll be having a webinar that you can learn how to do that. Okay, so seize the moment and regain focus basically means this. You clear your mind of the background noise, create mental, emotional, and physical space, excuse me, and observe the reality without judgment that would prevent assumptions and biases from taking over in your decision-making process. Many senior teams really need to improve their critical thinking skills. Step 2, remember the future and craft a shared vision. Remembering the future is maybe an unusual concept for you, but today it's really, really important for you to go back to your one-page plan and align and recalibrate 2020 and Q2 of 2020 and maybe beyond. Because right now it can be a saving grace to remember where are we headed. This is going to go away, whatever we're facing, and have that vision be like a magnet pulling you toward it. And crafting a shared vision with your team and sharing that with your community is very important. I'm assuming you're having daily communication if you're an executive leader or owner, CEO, and that you're just continually updating people, that you're looking at the community that you're serving, how they're doing. But remember beyond this, where are we headed? Again, this morning, I was celebrating with a team that can see their vision in spite of these outside forces. And that is so energizing to have a shared vision that they can hold on to. And the idea is this: you have to really think of what is the ideal outcome, no matter what's happening now. If we can get through this and we're resilient and we have this shared vision, what's ideal for us and what would that mean? And then we also have to do mental contrasting. Hey, look, if we don't resolve this conflict, what will be the outcome and what will it mean for you and I? So you both answer that question. So it's very important to look at like you're at a fork in the road. The one fork is, that's the ideal. If we don't do anything and we don't resolve this conflict, look at what could happen. Real simple example, I work with physicians who are helping someone with type 2 diabetes, for example. You want to have a vision of health and well-being, and this one lady, she could see dancing at her granddaughter's wedding. But the doctor then, when he was working with her, helped her see that if she didn't change her diet and her lifestyle, she actually was in threat of losing a foot, not able to walk. So mental contrast with your team, what's ideal and what is it that we can do if we resolve this issue to make a difference? So consider what's the ideal outcome, how will we stay focused on solutions, remember the future to gain energy and the willpower to overcome the obstacles that are sure to come. And there's a great quote by Toughness and Posner, the only visions that take hold are shared visions, created when we listen very, very closely to others. That's probably a mantra that I would suggest you do. Listen to learn, ask to empower. Listen to learn, ask to empower. Those first two steps especially require that. Step 3 then, now that you have on your one-page plan a shared vision, it's clearly articulated, you've recalibrated in light of the circumstances you're facing, then we need to learn from the past. Probably your coach does this with you, that, hey, what have we learned from this Q1? What have we learned from this global health crisis? Man, there's so much more. We can clean house, clean up the clutter, all kinds of processes that Tag and Andrew, they're realizing were kind of a mess, and they're working on those right now. And the banks are real happy with them. They just got a report because of how they're handling this. They're using critical thinking. They're staying quiet in their mind. They're not getting overwhelmed, but really understanding, wow, we have processes and systems that need to be brought back into line. So the idea then is, what is the ideal outcome and what will it mean for you to achieve it? So you keep learning. Whoops, I went backwards there. I think my slide got to go this way. So I missed, so those were the wrong questions, sorry. Something happened to my slide deck. So the questions actually are in that section. Let me get to it in my book. Good thing I wrote a book about this. So questions actually 5 and 6. Questions 5 and 6. So what insights have you learned during this conversation? And what will you promise to do by when to be in alignment to achieve our shared vision? So sorry, messed up, had my own system problem there. So again, what insights have you learned during our conversation, and what will you promise to do by when to be in alignment to achieve our shared vision? So then you see, here's the boat crew coming back, you know, the challenging story that is driving your behavior is really important to understand. You know, what is it, what stories are you telling yourself about your team? You know, how have you learned from the past? And out of those stories, you begin to create a new scenario, a new possibility. Remember also, if you're frazzled, then that means it's almost impossible to think clearly. I would suggest that one of the resources that I'll point out before we leave today, it's called Amplify, amplify.com/wellbeing. They have a way to actually assess how frazzled your current culture is. So I would really recommend that. Finally, there are 2 ways of meeting difficulties. You alter the difficulties, or you alter yourself to meet them. And I think that's the concept from Phyllis in her quote. Finally, step 4, seek accountability to champion execution habits. It's really important when you study the Rockefeller habits that those habits become a part of your everyday life as a scale-up. In the book, I do describe some micro-learning about habits. It's called the if-then habit, that if this occurs, then we'll do this. This would be a great exercise for you and your senior teams to do. What are the lessons learned? And if we're going to get back in alignment, we're going to be accountable. Then if this occurs the next time, then this is what will happen. Makes it so much more likely that you'll create a new habit. And finally, how and when will you seek accountability to verify you're in alignment? So often I'm asked, how do you create a culture of accountability? The first step is that you train and equip everyone to have these in-the-moment conversations, productive conflict, and that they're willing to seek accountability. Then you will be able to have a culture of accountability. So it starts with mutual trust, respect, and accountability. Anticipate in advance the real challenges or obstacles that might interfere. So there's a new book called Upstream by Dan Heath. And the idea is, just think, Don't just always be downstream handling what's coming, but be upstream and predict what you want to create as a business and as a team. Remember, do what matters most. When we say, I don't have time, perhaps we're saying, well, it's not really my priority. So changing your response to conflict is key. Conflict will come. We have automatic thoughts. For example, you might think, hey, you have no idea what you're talking about. Or someone's pushing, hey, I'll push back. You have to reframe those thoughts. Step back from the inner thoughts that you're having and be curious. Look at it from a different angle and then participate in what we call in-the-moment conversations. Where's my cursor? It just went away. There it is. And stepping back and reframing is really that mindfulness, and then have what I'm calling an in-the-moment conversation. So basically, the overview is this. Seize the moment. Don't be seized by the outside. Regain focus. Remember your future, your vision, your mission, just like this picture of these seals. Craft a shared vision. What have we learned? And let's review constantly learnings and then put into practice some new habits. So hopefully you have some questions that I could address. So we'll go back to a view that I think I'll stop sharing that and just may have to use my whiteboard here. Any questions, Eugene?
Yeah, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Henry Joyce of the Align team, and I'm also going to allow all the attendees to raise their voice as well. You're currently muted, but I'm going to allow you all to talk. So Henry has a few questions that have been raised, and then if there's individual attendees that have questions that they'd like to ask, they should be allowed to do so momentarily. Henry?
Sure. So first question that that has come up. So a lot of companies are making difficult decisions during these times. I think a lot of those most challenging decisions have to do with personnel and hiring and firing, given the uncertainty, and that can be the source of a lot of conflict. So can you talk through, particularly with personnel, layoff, firing decisions, particular tips to work through conflicts and decisions regarding those types of issues?
So often, scaling up coaches, we've been equipped with the idea of helping to understand what's an A player, someone who lives the core values at a high degree and who's a high performer. A B player is someone who's not quite at that level. And then C players, you have to coach them up or out. What I'm experiencing with my current teams is they're holding on to the people right now. Now, some of you might be in such a desperate state that that's what you have to be doing. But still, the more the senior team has practiced mindfulness and the ability to remain calm and look at the brutal facts. My sense, Verne talked about this in a conversation with the coaches. Right now, it's probably time to let's just pause, if you can, with your people. And that's what's going on with the firms that I'm working with. But in the moment conversations then can lead to some point crucial conversations when you're letting someone off. But the emphasis now is let's just catch our breath this week and the next week. And I think the principles are still the same. You have to sometimes you help the person understand where you're headed, and in essence, it's a shared vision. But those are hard conversations. I don't think what I'm speaking about today is how you fire someone. I think it's how the senior team takes their time to use critical thinking and to look at the facts and let's just catch our breath and work with the people we have, would be my recommendation.
Great. I'll keep things open to questions people might want to ask tuning in, but another question that has come up is, especially given your background, what advice do you have for managing employees who may be feeling a lot of stress or anxiety right now? Maybe they have kids at home, who are off of school, struggling to adjust to that remote life. What advice do you have for managing those types of situations?
So whenever, when I was trained in the most intense situations, like a negotiation with someone who's really threatening others, deep listening is the key. You can't always in listening agree with the other person, but by deep listening, you can have compassion. I think this is a time for compassion. And I have 15 mid-market firms, and right now what they're doing is they're focused on serving and helping their employees and having compassion with them, and at the same time having a bias. We still have to get our work done. So they're meeting more often with those folks who are meeting or working from home. And in Indiana, you have to be home. You can't go to work. So it's not a choice. But the choice is that the teams I've been working with for several years now have this capacity of mindful, compassionate presence. Here's the hard facts. We need to get this out. There's still something we need to get done. And I think the idea is meet more often, have teams huddling more often. And if you've equipped your culture to have these conversations, then everyone addresses the brutal facts, as I think Jim Collins would say, but with compassion and mindfulness.
Henry, I will just let everybody know that I've allowed everyone to now have speaking rights. So if you have a question, you can unmute yourself and go ahead and raise your voice and ask Craig any question that you might have. Anyone?
This is Barry Gleason.
Hey, Barry, how are you?
I'm good. How are you this morning?
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Craig, it's good to see you. I have a client that just signed 2 months ago $1 million building. He was debt-free prior, and he's in panic mode right now. And my challenge to him yesterday was to consider how he's coming across to his team. What techniques would you use to deal with the leader that isn't quite rational?
So Barry, I know you, and I think that you have a calming presence about you. So that's where an executive coach is extremely important now. And so when we're sitting with someone, it's like in that boat, those seals in a boat, and one buddy is responsible and accountable for the other. So literally sit with the person who has this is overwhelmed by anxiety beyond frazzled, and help them to comprehend in this moment, what is a next step that I can do? As simple as it is, if they're not breathing and they're holding their breath, they're overwhelmed, that can be a problem, obviously. They're just, and what's going on are the automatic thoughts, Barry. So I would also find out, now tell me more, what is the real challenge for you? And you say that several times, and then say, and what else? And what else? We learned that from Michael Bengay-Stanier, that and what else? And as soon as the person names their deepest fears, we know that isn't always really what's going to happen. And so we have to help the person acknowledge, here's what I'm really thinking, but then to be able to observe it with some sense of distance. Now that's a lot of pressure, $1 million. Tag Burge had $1 billion. And Tag has been practicing this, and I saw him on Monday, and he said I could share this. He was overwhelmed by the possibilities. And so that's where challenging assumption, he had to challenge his own assumptions. So as a coach, what I would also do, look at the assumptions that he has, and I would then have something you can do about each one of them. We're assuming this is what we'll do. We'll assume this is what we'll do. If this is 80% possible, here's what will happen. If it's 90%, if it's 10%, here's what we'll do. The other thing, Barry, I would have a list of worries versus concerns. Worries you can't do anything about, concerns you can do something about.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. Anyone else with a question that they'd like to pose? Well, while you do formulate any additional questions, I will note that I am going to share a link via the chat. As Craig just mentioned, obviously now is a time when you or your coaching clients should be huddling more and communicating more. Everyone is remote. You want to exchange that information that is most critical to the day-to-day operations of your business. And so for those of you who might not be aware, Align has actually made its huddle tools available for free during this business interruption as a result of the COVID scare. So many of your clients or your companies might be thrust into managing remote teams for the first time. They might need a framework to manage their communication rhythms while they're trying to figure out where to go next, or sort of what are those next steps. Take a deep breath, as Craig said, and figure out what your next step is. Obviously, those in the scaling up community, we know how valuable huddles are right now. And so we as a team, we wanted to help as many companies as possible communicate and facilitate that exchange of critical business information. So what I've shared is a link that will take you to a landing page where you or your coaching clients can sign up for a very quick 10-minute demo of the huddle tools that are being made available, and they can use those tools for free during this business interruption. So I hopefully you or they will take advantage of this. Do we have any final questions? We're running up almost to the hour. Henry, or anyone else who's out there right now, anybody have any final questions for Craig? It's been a wonderful presentation, so please feel free to take advantage of the time that he's here with us.
So I see some of your names, your faces. Hey, you have tremendous resources. I can imagine those of you who are scale-ups, or that you're entrepreneurs, or you're in a business setting that's really a threat. Ronald Reagan once said, peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means. I don't have all the answers. I think the scaling up community, we try to offer as much as we can. Please read the handout that Eugene is going to send to you. I have some resources. I would suggest, if you want to know more about how to face fear, and maybe kind of Barry's question, staringdownthewolf.com is a great resource. Again, my mentor and coach, he's really helped me a lot. Even though I have 40 years of experience, Mark Devine's helped me tremendously. Culturesthatwork.com is my company. Please communicate. If you want to assess your culture to understand how frazzled they are, amplify.com/wellbeing. They're a tremendous resource for the scaling up community. They're here, happen to be in Indianapolis, Indiana, in the USA. But they have a resource that is immediately applied for free. I've given my phone number. This is the time to give. I'm not concerned about getting. And if you want to know more about critical thinking, I'll be sending an invite. And if you'd like to be a part of that, it's no cost. This is the time to give. This is the time to have compassion. And tomorrow morning, when you wake up, I want you to remember this poem. It's by Kalidasa, 3,000 years ago, written in India. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the varieties and realities of your existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, and the splendor of beauty. For yesterday is but a memory, tomorrow is only a dream, but today, well lived, makes every yesterday a memory of happiness, and every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. Such is the salutation to the dawn.
Thank you, Craig. If there are no further questions, I certainly want to thank everyone for attending today's Coach webinar. A huge thank you to Craig for some great content and a great presentation. If any of you have any questions about how to use the Align or the Scaling Up Scoreboard software tools to help you set priorities and think about these strategic planning questions, always don't hesitate to contact us at support@aligntoday.com. I have made that link available in the chat for our free huddle tools. And I would ask that you please mark your calendars for our next Coach webinar. It is going to take place on April 21st. And we will have Bill Gallagher, the host of the Scaling Up podcast, who will be presenting a webinar on Growing Pains, 7 Simple Leadership Habits for Sustaining Business Growth and Avoiding the Most Common Pitfalls. Of course, depending upon where we are in our COVID response, that that topic may change, but who knows? Anyway, we hope you will join us. Till then, we hope you have a great day. Please stay safe. Please stay healthy, and have a wonderful week. Thank you so much.